Tom Brady, who I don't, as a Jet fan, but I always respect him, probably the greatest quarterback of all time,
I guess.
sat down with Howard Stern for an interview, which I found interesting in itself. But Howard Stern asked him about his relationship with his teammates who knew from years ago that he had that hat, that MAGA hat in his locker room and in his locker, excuse me, within the locker room, and players saw him. So they asked him if he, Stern asked if, quote, he ever felt guilty or self-consciousness about having to be the cantankerous leader of a majority black roster while being a white man. And this was all around the Trump hat, I'll call it that, being in his locker room. This, and I'm going to read there was a really good article by Martenzie Johnson for The Undefeated called The White Privilege of Tom Brady Not Seeing Race. And he wrote here in his response to it, Brady, clearly caught off guard by the question, responded, never. I never saw race. I'm going to stop right there. Dear white people, the Great Show movie on there, please, 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 don't say that. Don't say that you don't see race. Whenever you say you don't see race, it just shows me how privileged you are in a situation that you don't ever have to think about race. That's literally what you're saying. It's like when white people say, yo, I'm not racist, I got black friends. That makes me actually think that you probably are racist. It's not comforting to anybody black. The same way when you say, or of color, that you don't see race. Let's continue. Brady then said, I think sports transcends race. It transcends wealth. It transcends all that. Transcend is another one of those words that gets me to roll my eyes when people use it talking about race. You get to know and appreciate what someone else may bring. When you're in a locker room with 50 guys, you don't think about race because you're all the same at that point. Except that's not really true if you've been in an NFL locker room. He continues, white, black, whatever it is, you figure out how to get along. Brian, have you been in the NFL locker room?
No, actually.
You
I've
have
been in a
not.
lot of basketball locker rooms. I've been in other kind of locker rooms. Baseball's an interesting locker room. But yeah.
Yeah. Let me say this about my history of covering sports and being in NFL locker rooms. I've been quite a few NFL locker rooms.
Yes, you've been in plenty.
NFL locker rooms are probably the most segregated locker rooms, right? And I'm actually going to take race as a factor here, and I'll get to that, but primarily because of position. People generally hang out with the position groups that they work out with. So the offensive linemen hang out together. The D linemen hang out together. The linebackers hang out together. The cornerbacks hang out together. The running backs kind of all vibe together.
Right.
That's generally how it is. If you think about some of these groups of players, they are very divided by race. Quarterbacks in the league, generally white. Offensive linemen, generally white, usually from the South or the Midwest. A lot of the cornerbacks, wide receivers, running backs, generally black. From the South, various parts of the country, and the West Coast, but you'll see that. So there is this division, and you don't see as much mixing. Now, I have to believe, as a black man in America, you as a Latino man in America,
right.
Do you think for 1 second that these minority people that were in the Patriots locker room weren't give Tom Brady the side eye? Now, yeah, they might not hang with him, but they definitely were giving him the side eye.
So I'm thinking of this and how just sort of fundamental it is when everything is split up in this way, right? What you're talking about, the segregation and the clickiness of football, let's use that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is, in office culture, it's the same thing as like people in this department, people in sales, people creatively work here, other people do this, writers, whatever. Like it's the same sort of thing. Like you're playing your position, you're with whoever's in your sort of part of the building, so to speak, and that's just how it is. Like you're typically cool with the people that work in your department. Now you boil that down to an even more basic structure in school. The jocks are here, the nerds are here, the other people are here. You know what I mean? Like that sort of thing always happens even there. So if for people to, I guess, fully understand it, just think of it at its most basic form. It's like high school, and think about how cliquey that is. The NFL is really no different. A basketball locker room, like the same sort of thing. Not basketball, not as much because everyone's sort of, really together there. But baseball, for example, bunch of different positions. Pitchers are going to be over here. Catchers are going to work together over here. Middle infielders, et cetera, et cetera. And football is the sport with the most players in a locker room. So think about how cliquey that can get. So as it relates to Tom Brady, I mean, yeah, there's definitely going to, like the safeties who, how much are they going to really talk to the quarterbacks on a daily basis? Probably not much. but they're gonna know that you, the quote unquote leader of this team, having the MAGA hat in the locker room, and what that sort of symbolizes, and it gets worse and worse by the day at this point.
Word.
And you're talking about, not seeing color, and if I'm Devin McCourty or Jason McCourty, whatever McCourty's on the Patriots, because I actually don't know because they're twins. Whichever McCourty's on the Patriots, I'm side-eyeing that. Like, I'm looking at you like, dude, you're bugging. You know what I mean? Now think about it from a running back's perspective, who he has to hand you the ball. Like, if you're Sony Michel, or if you're a wide receiver like Mohamed Sanu, how do they feel about that sort of thing? You know what I mean? So it's a weird
Look, and
sort of dynamic.
People, we have to work with people who support the person in office and all his ideologies, and people do that every day. So I'm not saying that, but I do think the privilege that Brady is showing by saying this statement. And I want to read just a little bit of what Mackenzie Johnson wrote, because I think he really hit the nail on the head in this article. He said, whatever one might think about Brady's idea of racial harmony based on his comments, it's clear he possesses a privilege unique to a successful, famous white man, the six-time Super Bowl champion who has made more than $200 million in his career, not including the $50 million contract that he recently signed with the Buccaneers, can choose not to see race, something his black teammates over the last 20 years haven't been afforded. Race is everywhere in America. Again, dear white people, to choose to not see it might sound praiseworthy, but it is also a conscious decision to ignore the unpleasantness of racism and discrimination, not to mention acknowledge each other's different backgrounds. Colorblindness erases the experiences of the hundreds of black teammates Brady's had over the years, saying that you, quote, don't see color is a signal to society that, one, you're a different white person from those slavery era or Jim Crow white people, and two, you couldn't be racist because you don't even think about it. But before, former teammates of Brady, such as James White, Mohamed Sanu, and Devin McCourty, you mentioned, can't wave a wand, and suddenly you have 400 years of African-American history vanish because it helps their white coworkers sleep better at night. Well said, Mackenzie Johnson. Well said. Like, it's ridiculous, and I think it's ridiculous in the context of sports that people want to take color out of sports. Look, here on this podcast, we talk about sports with color. You can't have sports without color. That's what we're in right now. More on that 3-word term coming at some later point. Right. But that's not something that you can take out of it. Sports is going to have color. We just talked about even the racial impacts around Gundy and Oklahoma. You can't talk about it out. And when people try to push it out the conversation, enough with that. So boo Tom Brady for that. There's a lot of things you boo Tom Brady for. You like him, but the privilege that's exuded there, come on, stop it.
And I generally think that, like, white people who do say that they don't see color, I think some of them, at least, they really think like that's the way to sort of go about it. They just don't know any better, and they have to be educated on how do you actually look at these things, how do you talk about these things, because they think in their minds, some of them at least, and I'm gonna shoot them a little bit of bail, I guess. They think in their minds that when they're saying that they don't see color, is that, oh, I see everybody the same. And they think that that's the right way to go about it, when we have to tell them, like, no, that's not what you say. You have to look at it a totally different thing. You're supposed to see color because this way it will help you sort of determine some other things. You know what I mean? Like, it'll help you go about other things a certain way and not just see everyone the same, because we're not all the same in that way. Like, our history is not the same. How we all got here is different. Our backgrounds are totally different. So you have to be able to adjust to that person by person. So he needs to be better educated on that. I don't know, because certain people that grow up in certain backgrounds where, if you grow up in like the Midwest, for example, and you're in a town that's, a largely white town, you're probably not going to come across a ton of black people until you get to a certain point of your life. And by that time, you could be 22 years old. You don't know how to go about it.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that people may not know how to go about it or whatever, but that's not an excuse to refuse to see race. Because I always look at it as a choice, right, Brian? Like, you're making a choice to not do it. You know what I mean? And I think, Martenzi said in the end of his article, he talked about some people look at this, who've researched this, look at it as color evasiveness rather than color blindness. And I do think it's a choice that you are making to say that you don't want to see it because it makes you uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, I think, for some white people to talk about the sins of the past and or the sins that are currently going on too, and how it affects people of color. So, but if you don't have these conversations, you constantly want to avoid it, which I think is a huge problem in America. This is why you get comments like this.